Her daughter said, "You can sleep on the porch. The dogs are in your room." Ruth Everly, retired carpenter and widow, didn't flinch. Candace sipped Pinot, laughing with clients, too busy to notice the woman who once built her crib by hand. By sunrise, Ruth's name would be back where it belonged, on the deed, the accounts, and the legacy Candace tried to hijack. She'd weathered fire, betrayal, and winter alone. Now she'd rebuild, one boundary at a time, and this time, no one would mistake silence for surrender. When the hammer dropped, it wouldn't be wood she was shaping. It'd be justice. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The throw pillow hit the porch floor with a soft thud, its floral pattern as fake as the smile that tossed it. Ruth Everly stood just past the threshold of her daughter's craftsman-style home, one hand still wrapped around the handle of her worn duffel, the other bracing the screen door behind her. The autumn air in Asheville, cut clean, sharp with pine and the first whisper of winter. She wasn't cold, not yet, but she was being chilled in a different way, by blood. Candace Everly, dressed in cashmere and cruelty, barely paused her Bluetooth call to glance over. "Make yourself comfortable on the porch," she said. Already walking away, voice rising again into rehearsed laughter. "I know, right? 4 bedrooms and she picks now to burn hers down." Ruth's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She caught a whiff of the lavender room spray Candace always overused, wafting out as the front door shut gently, delicately behind her, like an apology that never arrived. The pillow sat there like punctuation. Final, soft, dismissive. She turned and took in the porch, whitewashed railings, rocking chairs facing the street, potted mums wilting in overpriced planters. The porch swing still creaked from when Mitchell used to rock baby Chloe to sleep on it. That memory, warm and heavy, ached in her throat. Candace's voice echoed faintly from inside. "The dogs are settled in Ruth's old room. It's spotless now. I had the carpet steam cleaned twice." Ruth stepped off the welcome mat like stepping off a lie. She moved toward the window and glanced in. There it was, her old guest room, now lined with plush dog beds, framed poodle portraits, and monogrammed food bowls. The bedding she'd once quilted by hand was gone. The hardwood she'd sanded was covered in paw-safe rugs. She blinked hard but didn't flinch. A scraping sound drew her attention. Mitchell stood awkwardly by the side door, holding a rolled-up blanket under one arm and a lukewarm cup of coffee in the other. "Hey, Ruth," he muttered, not quite meeting her eyes. Didn't know you'd be here this long." She nodded once. "I didn't either." He offered the blanket with a shrug. "Hope this helps." "It won't," she said flatly, taking it anyway. She draped it over the swing like she was laying a flag across a coffin. He disappeared without another word. A gust of wind rattled the porch light and stirred the leaves piled against the railing. Ruth settled onto the swing slowly, every joint announcing its protest like floorboards in a quiet house. Her fingers brushed against the carved initials on the armrest. R.E., burned in 30 years ago by a husband who'd once promised, "If anything ever happens, you come here. You're always home here." She stared up at the stars breaking through the dusk. The door creaked open again, but softer this time. A face peeked through the sliver of light. Chloe, 17 now, eyes like her grandfather's. "You don't have to stay," Chloe whispered. Her voice cracked with guilt and something stronger. Ruth's eyes softened just a bit. "Some storms are better watched from the porch." Chloe hesitated, then passed her a folded napkin. Inside, a homemade cookie, still warm. Ruth didn't ask questions. She just touched her granddaughter's hand briefly and tucked the cookie into her coat pocket. When the door closed again, Ruth finally reached for her phone. The screen glowed pale blue in the dark. Her fingers hovered for a moment, then tapped out a message. "I'll only need the storage unit 1 more week." She hit send, then laid back against the pillow like it was a throne. The swing creaked gently beneath her as the wind picked up. Somewhere inside, a dog barked. Let them think she was the one sleeping outside. She knew what was coming, and this time, she was wide awake. The laughter behind the French doors wasn't meant for Ruth. From her corner on the porch, now dimly lit and drafty in the late evening chill, Ruth watched silhouettes dance and sip under the amber glow of pendant lights. Candace's wine and cheese client mixer was in full swing, and Ruth hadn't received so much as a nod. Inside, waiters weaved through tailored guests with trays of stuffed figs and sparkling rosé. Ruth adjusted the blanket over her knees and watched the party through the pane, invisible and deliberate. Candace was radiant in a silver wrap dress, the kind that looked expensive even if it wasn't. Her voice floated above the rest, polished and persuasive. And we just acquired a second property on Sky Pine Drive. Transferred title last month, solid margins. No liens, clean deed. It was in the family. Sentimental, sure, but underused. The crowd nodded, impressed. Ruth blinked. Sky Pine Drive. Her mouth went dry. She stood slowly, her joints protesting, and slipped inside under the guise of needing the restroom. No one stopped her. No one even noticed. Candace turned her back mid-sentence. The house smelled of citrus candles and smoked Gouda. Ruth passed the buffet and paused at the hallway gallery. Candace had curated it like a realtor's shrine, closing day photos, listing awards, and a single frame near the dining room that drew Ruth in like a string being pulled. There it was, a deed. Framed, labeled, Everly Cottage Acquisition, 2023. The signature leapt out at her like a slap, R. Everly. Her stomach flipped. Candace had framed the theft like a trophy. Ruth took a paper cocktail napkin from the table, pulled a pen from her coat pocket, and using the bottom edge of a hors d'oeuvres plate, carefully jotted down the file number, printed at the top of the deed. Her hand didn't tremble. She folded the napkin, slid it into her coat lining, and walked calmly back outside as laughter bubbled behind her. The next morning, Nora knocked with 2 steaming coffees and a face full of thunderclouds. Your daughter's party made the neighborhood app, she said, handing Ruth the cup. Someone called it Aspen in Asheville. Ruth huffed quietly. She never did like anything local. But Nora was already crouched beside her, laptop balanced on her knees. I did some digging, that deed you saw, it's real, filed last month. Public record. Ruth's voice sharpened. The signature? Digitized scan of an old signature, looks like. Sloppy if you know what to look for. Same one from the hospital release papers after your wrist surgery in 2017. Ruth leaned back, her hand tightening around the coffee cup. The ceramic creaked beneath the pressure. She's betting on me dying quietly, she said finally, her voice flat. And she thinks she picked the right year. Nora raised an eyebrow. Did she? Ruth smiled grimly. She bet wrong. She pulled out her phone and opened her email app. Her fingers danced with purpose, not hesitation. She began typing, short, direct, and ice cold. To Harlan Cobb, subject, immediate appointment requested message. Deed fraud confirmed. She used an old signature. I want to fight this, tactfully and legally. We need to meet. Now. She hit send. The sun broke weakly over the trees as Nora reached over and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You ready for this? Nora asked. I was ready when I built that house with my bare hands, Ruth replied. This is just the second half of the job. The first crib she ever built smelled like cedar and fresh varnish. Ruth could still feel the way the chisel had moved in her palm, how each groove in the cradle's curved headboard had followed the rhythm of her breath. It was late summer then, and the garage fan hummed as sweat rolled down her spine. She remembered humming along to Patsy Cline, a paintbrush dangling from her teeth, when the baby kicked from inside Candace for the first time. She'd sanded every spindle of that crib by hand. Chloe had slept like a stone in it. Now that same room was spotless and sterile. Her grandchild's first bed replaced with hypoallergenic pet mattresses, plush stairs for arthritic paws, and a custom dog water fountain. The framed sketch Ruth once hung above the crib, a pencil drawing of the Blue Ridge Mountains, was gone. In its place, a minimalist photo of 2 white poodles sitting on a leather bench. The door was cracked open just enough for Ruth to see it all. She shut it quietly, then walked away. Later that morning, still dressed in her gardening jeans, Ruth stepped in from the backyard after pruning Candace's overgrown azaleas. Her boots were muddy, her knees ached, and her hands bore fresh scratches from trimming thorns. Candace crossed her path in the hallway, eyes flicking down to the trail of wet soil left in Ruth's wake. "Please," Candace said with a tight-lipped smile, "stay off the carpet next time." Ruth blinked once. "It's my dirt. I've got a showing this weekend." Ruth nodded, slow and deliberate. "I'll make sure the roots don't follow me in." Candace's heels clicked away. The scent of her jasmine perfume lingered longer than her presence. That afternoon, Ruth sat on the porch swing, wiping sap from her arms when the door creaked open again. Chloe stepped out barefoot, hair tied up, a textbook tucked under one arm. She didn't sit. She just hovered. "I didn't know," Chloe mumbled, "that you were actually sleeping out here." Ruth looked up at her, eyes warm but unreadable. "It's all right," she said softly. "Some truths only bloom when it rains." Chloe swallowed. "Mom said you liked the porch." She made it sound like a choice. Ruth let the words hang in the air like fog. That evening, Ruth climbed into her car, a battered '99 station wagon she hadn't driven in a week, and pulled the passenger seat forward. From the back compartment, she slid out a long, flat folder wrapped in weathered canvas. She hadn't touched it since Tom's funeral. Inside were architectural blueprints, yellowed with time but crisp and clean where it mattered. They outlined every wall, pipe, beam, and square foot of the Sky Pine cottage, her cottage. Her name, not Candace's, was etched at the bottom alongside a faded ink signature, Thomas L. Everly, Master Carpenter. In the margins, Tom had scribbled notes in his blocky print, add built-in shelf for Ruth's books and window seat in Chloe's room. She exhaled slowly. Steady hands photographed every page. She opened her old email, created a new folder in the cloud, and uploaded each blueprint under a title that gave her a sliver of satisfaction, proof of ownership. Then, just as the last file uploaded, she heard the sound of Candace's voice floating from the driveway. Ruth stepped out of the car and into the fading light. Candace was near the garden gate, speaking animatedly, with a couple dressed in matching vests and designer hiking boots. The man flipped through a photo booklet, while the woman nodded toward Ruth's burned cottage visible down the hill. "She built it herself years ago," Candace said proudly. "It's just sitting there now. We're handling the listing, pre-market. The structure's sentimental but outdated." The couple smiled politely. The woman looked past Candace and locked eyes with Ruth. Ruth didn't smile back. She didn't move. She just stood there, hands in her jacket pockets, the cool metal of her car keys resting against her palm like a trigger she hadn't yet pulled. The scent of cinnamon and sugar wafted down Sky Pine Drive, warm and deceptive as a southern smile. Ruth stood at the foot of the gravel path, a Tupperware tray of brownies cradled in her arms like a peace offering, but she wasn't here for peace. A red and white open house sign fluttered beside a cluster of fall mums. The property it pointed to was Ruth's. Burned and bruised by fire, yes, but still hers. Candace had strung bunting from the porch railing like it was a harvest festival. Ruth adjusted the brim of her wide straw gardening hat, her flannel shirt stained with honest dirt and the scent of rosemary. She didn't knock. Inside, the home was filled with soft jazz, the clink of wine glasses, and the murmur of potential buyers trying not to sound too eager. Candace, crisp, in a cream sweater and heeled boots, stood near the fireplace, gesturing to a set of framed photos. "The kitchen will be updated. Marble counters, open shelving," she said, smiling like a game show host. "Here's our mock-up." Ruth drifted toward the display as though admiring it. She eyed the mock-up photos, sleek, bright, unburned. From before the fire, there were no signs of soot, smoke damage, or the collapsed back stairwell. She bit into a brownie and chewed slowly. "Sweet, too sweet." Candace caught sight of her, momentarily faltering. "Mother," she said, with a smile so tight it threatened to snap. "What a surprise." "Brownies," Ruth replied, holding up the tray. "Figured if you're selling the soul of the place, it oughta at least smell like family." A few potential buyers chuckled awkwardly. Candace's nostrils flared. "Let me take those," she said, grabbing the tray and setting it on the refreshment table. "Why don't you sit? I'll just wander," Ruth interrupted, already heading down the hall. She moved room to room like she was floating through a memory. The wallpaper in the hallway still bore smoke stains, if you knew where to look. A water-damaged ceiling tile sagged like a tired shoulder. None of that showed up in the photos. In the kitchen, she paused by a ceramic planter holding an oversized fern. From her flannel pocket, she slipped a compact recorder no bigger than a lipstick tube and tucked it behind the leaves. It chirped once, then went silent. A few minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Harlan, there's a discrepancy in the land transfer signature. Call me when you're alone." Her stomach didn't drop. It tightened. Back outside, Ruth stood near the cider stand where Nora had just arrived, wearing sunglasses and a trench like a noir detective. "Well?" Nora asked, sipping cider like it might hold vodka. "She's cooked up something," Ruth whispered, voice low and calm. "I just turned on the oven." Nora followed Ruth's gaze to the porch where Candace laughed with two clients. "Is it me?" Nora muttered. "Or is she smiling like a butcher picking out knives?" Ruth didn't answer. She was watching Chloe, standing awkwardly by the garage, phone in hand. Their eyes met. Chloe hesitated, then tapped her screen and walked quickly away. Moments later, Ruth's phone buzzed again. A screenshot, the listing page, bright and bold, reading title secure, move-in ready. Her name was nowhere on the post. Ruth stared at the screen for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind a carpenter wears when they spot a crooked beam in a house someone claimed was finished. The letter slanted wrong. Ruth held the printed quitclaim deed between her fingers, studying the signature under sunlight like it was a confession. The curled like a ribbon, too graceful, too smooth. The woman who signed it hadn't broken two fingers in her dominant hand, framing a window in '89. Ruth had. That was the mistake. "It's not yours," Harlan said through the phone. Voice sharp and steady. "The deed was filed using a sample from your hospital discharge paperwork. That's how they matched your identity. But it's forged. That signature was from a time when your hand couldn't even close around a pen." Ruth sat on the porch swing, wind brushing the back of her neck like a whisper from her late husband. She didn't speak right away, just opened the manila folder in her lap. Years of notes, checks, birthday cards, wood orders, all in her true handwriting. Sharp, slanted, precise. Hers, "I've got what I need," she said quietly. "I'll send them for comparison." She stood, walked inside Candace's house without knocking, and past Mitchell in the hallway. "Ruth," he stammered. She didn't even pause. By late afternoon, she was hunched at the edge of the guest bathroom sink, spreading out the documents under Chloe's help. Chloe moved quickly, aware of every creak in the house. "You sure these are enough?" the girl whispered. "I just need them to show a different rhythm," Ruth replied. "Ink tells the truth. Paper remembers." When she sealed the envelope and handed it to Chloe to drop at the UPS store, her hand trembled, but not from fear. Later that evening, while the dogs barked at passing headlights and Candace paced her room arguing over Bluetooth, Chloe slipped into the porch again. "She's nervous," Chloe whispered. "I heard her telling Mitchell what to say if anything goes to court. She told him to stick to the story, that you signed it willingly, that you were getting confused again." Ruth's jaw clenched. She said she was sick of waiting for nature to take its course. Ruth stared into the darkness of the yard for a long, burning second. "Can you say that again, exactly like you just did?" Chloe hesitated. "Are you recording me?" Ruth tapped her phone screen. "Yes, I'll delete it if you ask. But this isn't just about me anymore." Chloe took a shaky breath, nodded, and repeated it. Every word. By morning, Harlan had filed the complaint. Fraud, intent to defraud a senior. Coercion. The ink hadn't even dried before the backlash began. Candace's lawyer emailed a cease and desist. A neighbor's friendliness turned cold. Mitchell avoided eye contact entirely, pouring coffee with a hand that trembled. Nora came by at noon with 2 thermoses and her usual blunt delivery. Frauds like wet wood honey. Takes time to burn, but once it catches, it lights up the whole damn house. Ruth sipped from the thermos. She's got her name all over that fire. Nora tilted her head. She won't let go easy. You need to be ready when she claws back. I've been clawed before, Ruth replied. And I've got thicker skin than she knows. That night, a car pulled up quietly outside the house. No headlights, no engine noise after the stop. Ruth sat upright on the swing, notebook in hand, pen still warm from hours of writing. She listened, watched. Then came the knock. Not on the door, on the porch post. A courier. The man didn't speak. He handed her a thick envelope and walked away. As his taillights disappeared, Ruth peeled it open under the porch light. The words at the top screamed in legal font. Summons, Candace Everly v. Ruth Everly, harassment claim her own daughter. Suing her. For trying to get back the home she never gave away. The mailbox wheezed when Ruth pulled it open, like even it was tired of carrying the weight of this war. Inside 4 new envelopes. All legal, 1 certified. She thumbed through them, the paper slicing her calloused thumb. The blood didn't faze her. What stopped her breath was the bold lettering on the latest delivery. Final warning, cease and desist. She looked toward the porch, where the wind lifted the hem of an old Afghan draped over the swing. There wasn't a square inch of her life that hadn't been touched now. Home, name, bloodline, reputation. And still, the storm hadn't broken her spine. Not yet. Online, Candace had already gone on the offensive. The post was a glossy headshot. Candace in pearls, soft lighting, local success story, energy oozing out of every pixel. The caption read, heartbroken to be dealing with personal family drama. My mother is battling memory issues and confusion. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time. There were hashtags. #ElderCareMatters, #FamilyFirst, #Unstable Break. Ruth didn't comment. She didn't argue. She saved the post to her phone. Then she screenshotted the dozens of likes, the one comment that read, sending love, you're doing the right thing. She's rewriting me before I'm gone, Ruth muttered. By evening, Nora and Harlan were seated at the small metal table on Ruth's porch, a legal pad between them, coffee steaming in mismatched mugs. She's weaponized your silence, Harlan said, flipping through his files. Now we take it back. I don't want a settlement, Ruth said flatly. I want my name back. My home, my truth. Harlan gave her a measured nod. Then we go loud. Nora leaned in. We start by showing the cracks. Paper first, then the people. The next morning, Ruth found a note under her coffee mug. You're not alone. See, next to it sat her favorite blend, warm, untouched. Chloe had been slipping out early to avoid her parents, but she never left Ruth without something. Coffee, fresh fruit, once even an old photo of Ruth holding baby Chloe in a handmade quilt. That morning, the note mattered more than the caffeine. Ruth started recording everything. She turned her phone on quietly, before entering any room where Candace or Mitchell were speaking. She logged the timestamps, saved voicemails, made voice memos every time Candace's tone shifted from syrup to sharp. She kept a small spiral notebook in her pocket, like she had during her contractor years. Pages filled fast, 4:12 p.m. Candace said, you don't own anything anymore. It's not 1973. 6:45 p.m. Mitchell asked if I remembered to take my pills. I don't take pills. Every word was fuel. Harlan filed the countersuit that Friday afternoon. Charges: elder financial exploitation, emotional abuse, forgery, intent to defraud. The courthouse's beige exterior never looked more like a war bunker. When Ruth signed the affidavit, her pen didn't tremble. Her jaw did, but not from fear. From fury. I buried a husband, she said softly to Harlan. Built 2 homes. Lived through every kind of recession. I will not be evicted from my name. He nodded. Then we fight with fireproof ink. That night, the porch was quiet. Too quiet. Even the dogs inside hadn't barked in hours. The moonlight spilled across Ruth's notebook, now halfway full. She'd titled it The War They Started. Her phone buzzed. A single text. Storage unit lease expiring in 3 days. Packer forfeit. Her breath hitched. That unit held everything. Photos, tax records, her husband's letters, the original blueprints to the house. Candace claimed wasn't hers. She'd forgotten to renew it in the storm of legal filings. Or maybe someone had nudged the timeline forward. The lock clicked open like a whispered confession. Ruth stood just inside the threshold of the narrow storage unit, the metal door groaning as it rolled up, echoing across the quiet row of concrete garages. The late afternoon sun sliced into the unit in sharp angles, highlighting dust motes that danced in the air like unsettled ghosts. She stepped forward, heart beating slow but heavy. Everything in here, every box, crate, trunk, had been packed with care and grief. Some hadn't been touched since Gerald's funeral 10 years ago. Others had been shoved in recently, in the chaos after the fire. All of it was her, until Candace decided it wasn't. "I don't have time to mourn memories," she muttered, snapping on a pair of old leather gloves. "I came to recover evidence." The first box held her late husband's flannel shirts, still smelling faintly of sawdust and pine oil. Ruth paused, fingers brushing the collar of his favorite red one. She hadn't cried at his funeral. Not then, not now. But she stood a little longer with the fabric bunched in her palm before folding it gently and setting it aside. Next came tools, some rusted, some gleaming, organized in boxes marked with painter's tape. Their handles wore her fingerprints like fossils. She ran a hand over her old level, a square tool Gerald had once called the Everly marriage counselor. It kept things even when emotions ran crooked. A taped banker's box marked tax returns 1984, 2001 made her chuckle grimly. "Candace never knew about the side account, did she?" she whispered, slipping the box into her cart. She dug deeper. At the back, tucked beneath a folded tarp and 2 thick binders, sat a black lockbox, heavy, metal, the kind with a dial and rust crawling around the edges. It had one word written across the top in faded gold paint. "Everly, private." She called Nora from the sidewalk. 10 minutes later, Nora pulled up in her old Chevy, tires crunching over gravel. She stepped out holding a thermos and a pry bar. "Never thought I'd be doing heist work in my retirement," she said, eyebrows raised, handing Ruth the thermos. "Hot cider. In case this thing's booby-trapped with disappointment." Ruth grinned. "Let's crack it." They sat cross-legged on the floor of the unit like teenagers, Ruth steadying the box while Nora worked the edge of the lid. After several grunts, a click echoed between them. Inside, wrapped in wax paper and bundled envelopes, were documents that hadn't seen daylight in decades. The first file was a manila envelope, marked Revised Will, July 1999. Ruth's fingers trembled as she unfolded it. Gerald's handwriting filled the page, notarized and stamped. The will clearly named Ruth as sole inheritor of the Everly estate, including the house Candace was now trying to sell from under her. Candace wasn't even included in this version, Ruth whispered, scanning the line that confirmed everything. "She's not owed a damn thing." Another folder held land surveys, mortgage payoff receipts, and letters Gerald had written but apparently never mailed. One addressed to Ruth, one to Chloe, one to the courts, if ever needed. Nora exhaled sharply. He knew, even back then, he knew she'd come clawing. Ruth took photos of each page, uploaded them to the proof of ownership cloud folder she'd created. Then she called Harlan, voice crisp and controlled. "I've got the original will, with notarization, a signature and proof of my name on every legal line." "Scan and send immediately," he said, sounding more energized than she'd heard in weeks. And Ruth, this could end it. Before she closed the lockbox, Ruth sat back, letting the cool concrete seep into her bones. For the first time in days, her shoulders loosened. She pulled out her phone and texted Chloe. You were right to stand with me. I've got something real now, something they can't deny. Chloe responded instantly. Whatever happens, I'm staying in your corner. Always. As Ruth rolled down the door and latched the lock, the hairs on her arms stiffened. She felt it before she saw it. Eyes on her back, the kind that burn without light. Across the street, near the edge of a chain-link fence, a shadow lingered beside a black sedan. No movement, no wave, just stillness, watching. The figure disappeared the moment Ruth turned fully toward it. Her jaw set. Let them watch. The first light flickered to life with a loud click. A motion sensor Ruth installed herself, wired tight along the beam she'd carved with her husband's initials 30 years ago. It cast a golden hue over the porch boards that had felt cold beneath her back not long ago. Now the light stayed on like a promise. The second light flared above the driveway, then another behind the tool shed. By the time evening settled in over the Asheville hills, Ruth's house glowed like a lighthouse in hostile waters. If Candace's plan was intimidation, it would have to squint through a halogen spotlight now. Ruth moved with methodical grace, climbing up the ladder and adjusting the camera angles on the eaves. Each device beeped softly as she connected them to her tablet. Her hands, though stiff from years of carpentry and grief, were steady. Behind her, Chloe stood barefoot in the grass, holding the instruction booklet. "You're basically Fort Knox now," she said with a half smile. Ruth gave her a look. Fort Ruth. Let's not undersell the branding. They both chuckled, the sound rare and warm between them. "You know these record to the cloud now, right?" Chloe asked, walking her through the last software steps. "Even if someone yanks one out, it's still saved." "Good," Ruth said. "If they're going to look into my life, they should know I'm looking right back." That night, Ruth sat at her kitchen table with a cup of lemon balm tea, her laptop open, the cursor blinking on a blank page titled, "To Whom It May Concern." Then she began to type. She told the story plainly, no dramatics, no speculation, just the facts. The fire, the forged deed, the porch pillow, the silence from Candace's lips, and the screams in her actions. She ended with a single line, "This is not about a house, it's about a woman they expected to vanish." Chloe helped her upload it to a neighborhood Facebook group and a local Reddit thread. By morning, her post had 143 comments and counting. Neighbors began to show up in small but steady ways. Mrs. Hollis from next door brought by tomato soup and said, "My son did the same to me last year. You're not alone." A retired mailman offered to escort Ruth to her hearings. "Used to walk these streets with pride. Time we make them proud again." And Nora naturally turned her weekly quilting group into a war council. She stood at the end of Ruth's driveway, handing out flyers. Elder abuse isn't just bruises. Sometimes it wears Chanel and sells your home. Meanwhile, Candace's social media presence fractured under the weight of contradiction. Posts praising her family values were met with screenshots from Ruth's letter. One client commented, "Didn't you just put your mother on the porch?" Candace responded with glossy videos in curated lighting, spinning her side. Ruth was senile, forgetful, paranoid. But the more she posted, the more detached she seemed. Even her polished hair couldn't hide the cracks forming beneath the concealer. That night, Ruth stood on the porch in her robe, watching a car idle across the street. Dark windows, no plates visible, engine humming low like a threat. She turned toward the porch camera and gave it a tight smile. "I hope you're getting this in 4K, she muttered. Inside, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, expecting another message from Chloe or Nora. Instead, it was Harlan. "Ruth," his voice came quick. "Urgent. We've got a problem. The court just scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow." Early, Ruth straightened. "On what grounds?" They wouldn't say. Candace filed something sealed, but they're fast-tracking it. A beat of silence. Ruth's eyes went to the porch light again. Still burning bright. "Then let's give them a show," she said, already reaching for her calendar. The courtroom lights buzzed low like nervous energy, humming above the polished benches and sharp angles of justice. Ruth sat at the plaintiff's table in a dark navy cardigan, hair pinned up with quiet defiance. Chloe clutched a folder beside her. eyes flicking from door to clock to her grandmother's weathered hands. The door creaked. Candace swept in like she owned the courthouse, heels sharp, blazer blood red, lips tight. The bailiff called. All rise. Ruth rose slow, not weak, deliberate. The judge entered. Candace's lawyer stood first, voice smooth as silk and twice as thin. Your Honor, my client has been a victim of sustained harassment, character defamation, and emotional trauma, perpetrated by her mother. A murmur passed through the courtroom like a wind gust against glass. Candace dabbed her eye with a handkerchief. She's been showing up at open houses, making wild accusations, recording me, stirring up our daughter. Ruth didn't blink. Her pulse was slow. The truth was heavier than performance, and it carried weight. Chloe stood next. She hesitated, then stepped forward. My name is Chloe Everly, and I'm 17. I've lived in that house, well, next to that porch, for most of my life. Her voice cracked, but she cleared it with courage. I love my mom, but I won't lie for her. Candace shifted in her chair, jaw clenching. Chloe continued. I heard my mom coaching Mitchell on what to say if Grandma made noise. She told him to act like she was confused. She used words like put her in a home. I recorded part of it. A gasp from somewhere in the crowd. Even the judge leaned forward. Harlan stood next. Calm, surgical. He submitted the forensic handwriting analysis. 3 samples, Ruth's signature across 20 years. Then the one on the forged quitclaim deed. The deed was filed using a signature pulled from an old injury waiver. Harlan explained. You'll notice the tremor. Her hand was in a cast at the time. The judge examined the papers, frowning. And this, Harlan said, lifting a sealed envelope, is the original will, undelivered. It names Mrs. Everly as sole heir and owner of the property. Candace visibly paled. The judge's gavel struck once. This court orders a temporary injunction against Candace Everly. You are prohibited from selling, transferring, or modifying the disputed property until further review. Candace shot to her feet. This is a circus. She spat. She's making me out to be a monster. No, Ruth said softly from her seat. You did that all by yourself. Candace's face tightened into something almost feral. You think this is over? I'll destroy what's left of your name. You'll be begging to sleep on that porch again. Chloe flinched. Ruth didn't. I've slept in worse places, Ruth murmured. The media caught wind within hours. A reporter from Asheville Citizen-Times snapped a photo of Ruth exiting the courthouse, flanked by Nora and Harlan. The headline ran by sundown. Elder abuse alleged in family property feud. Granddaughter testifies. Support swelled. Strangers reached out. People who'd seen Candace's listings online and now second-guessed their deals. Comments poured in under her latest open house post. This the same woman evicting her mom? Imagine treating your own blood like clutter. And Candace, once poised, now fumed behind staged videos and slick filters. Grip slipping. That night, Ruth settled into the porch swing, fingers around a steaming cup of chamomile. The sky above Asheville stretched wide and dark, stars pricking through like distant lanterns. I told you truth has teeth, she whispered to herself. Then a car slowed across the street. Headlights off. Ruth stiffened. It coasted past. She couldn't make out the driver. She turned to go inside when she spotted it on the top step. A package. No label. No sound when it had been placed. She picked it up with cautious hands and opened the box. Inside, a single Polaroid photo. Her porch. Her swing. Last night. From just a few feet away. The note was written in crooked Sharpie on the back of the Polaroid. 4 words. No punctuation. No signature. This isn't over, Ruth. Ruth stared at it under the kitchen light, her fingers trembling just enough to remind her she was still healing. But not broken. Not anymore. She slid the note into a Ziploc bag, pressing it flat with methodical care, then picked up the landline and dialed Harlan. His voicemail picked up. She didn't leave one. Whoever had come that close to her door wasn't just bluffing. They wanted her rattled, second-guessing. They'd mistaken her for someone who hadn't rebuilt an entire life before. By late morning, Chloe knocked on the screen door, clutching a folded piece of paper like a secret. She wore an oversized hoodie and yesterday's mascara under her eyes. Ruth waved her in. "I have something," Chloe whispered, glancing over her shoulder like she expected her mother to appear from the shadows. Ruth motioned to the table, where 2 mugs of herbal tea waited, untouched. Chloe unfolded the paper and slid it across. A printed bank statement. 1 deposit every week. $42.16, $38.10, $55. The line read, "Miscellaneous income. Chloe Everly. I've been putting aside anything I make babysitting, Venmo jobs, tips from helping at the antique shop. For you." Ruth's throat tightened. She traced her finger down the column, blinking harder than she meant to. "I can't fix all of it," Chloe said, "but I wanted you to know. I see you, and I believe you." Ruth swallowed the lump rising in her chest. "That's more than enough, sweetheart," she whispered. "More than most ever give." Later that day, Harlan arrived with a file folder thick with emails and legal memos. He looked tired but victorious. "I found the thread," he said without sitting. "Candace? She's been in direct contact with a company called Golden Peak Developments. They're known for flipping distressed properties, fast, under market value, and often using pressuring tactics." He pulled out a page and set it in front of Ruth. "This email chain shows Candace planned to have your house fully transferred and sold by the end of this quarter. The buyer already wired a retainer to her escrow agent. She was going to sell it before the court even ruled. She was betting on your silence," Harlan said grimly, "and hoping you'd be too exhausted to keep fighting." Ruth looked down at the proof. Her name had been boiled into spreadsheets and bullet points. No mention of blood, of sweat, of the memories that clung to her kitchen walls. She stood, bones stiff but spirit surging. "I want to say something," she said, "not to a judge, to the people." That evening, Ruth sat down with a yellow legal pad and began drafting a letter by hand. She wrote plainly about the fire, the porch, the quitclaim forgery, and the court. About the daughter who called her a burden, and the granddaughter who stood in the gap. It wasn't bitter, but it wasn't soft. 2 hours later, Chloe helped her type it up and email it to the Asheville Citizen-Times. She titled it, "The Price of Silence," a letter from a mother left outside. The following morning, the doorbell rang. It was Nora, holding a ceramic casserole dish that smelled like baked cheese and crushed garlic. "Lasagna," she said, barging past the threshold. "It doesn't fix betrayal, but it holds up damn well against despair." Ruth laughed for the first time in what felt like weeks. "I knew there was a reason I let you sass me all these years." Nora winked. "You keep standing. I'll keep feeding." They sat on the couch, plates in laps, the TV muted in the background. For once, it felt almost like home again. Later that afternoon, Ruth rolled up the left sleeve of her cardigan and stretched her arm out in front of her. The joint ached. Her right leg dragged slightly when she walked, but her stroke recovery was coming along. Her physical therapist had called her stubborn with purpose. She liked that. She was building her body the same way she had her carpentry bench. One screw, one movement, one breath at a time. They expected her to wither. Instead, she lifted. That night, as the porch light clicked on with a soft hum, Ruth sat by the window, sipping lemon water and journaling. The letter had gone live. Comments were rolling in, mostly support. A few doubters. One woman wrote, "My daughter did the same. You've given me the courage to speak up." Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Static crackled. Then a voice, low, deliberate, male, spoke, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." Silence. Click. The porch light buzzed faintly above Ruth's head as she screwed the final bolt into the new security camera mount. Her joints protested. but her hands never wavered. She'd built entire decks with less resolve. Threats didn't rattle a woman who'd once pulled herself out of a ravine, with a dislocated shoulder and nothing but a tree root. This was just a new kind of lumber, digital nails and silent recordings. She could still build safety, even if the blueprint had changed. Inside, Chloe stood by the hallway window, phone in hand. "That was definitely a burner number," she said. "No caller ID, no callback option. I searched the audio, nothing traceable." Ruth stepped inside, brushing grit from her palms. "Doesn't matter, let them whisper in the dark. We're turning on the lights." That night, Nora arrived with an overnight bag slung across one shoulder and a baseball bat in the other. "You expecting vampires or vandals?" Ruth asked with a smirk. "Does it matter?" Nora replied, tossing the bat onto the couch. "Both are allergic to old women with nothing left to lose." They settled in like a triangle of resistance. Chloe curled up on the floor with a pile of homework while Nora cleaned her glasses and mumbled about bad knees and worse tempers. Ruth took first watch at the window, journal open in her lap, pen gliding like a whisper. At 2:37 a.m., a faint creak echoed from the backyard. Ruth stiffened. Chloe sat bolt upright. Nora's hand reached slowly for the bat. They moved as one, silent, deliberate older women, trained not by combat but by motherhood and betrayal. Ruth opened the back door. A gust of cool Appalachian wind met her, laced with the scent of pine and something fouler spray paint. Her garden gate, the white iron one, with her initials welded in the center, hung crooked. The latch was snapped. Across its frame, in sloppy red letters, "Shut up or burn." Chloe gasped. "Oh my God." Ruth didn't flinch. She stepped forward, pulled her phone from her robe pocket, and began snapping photos, wide angles, close-ups time-stamped. Then she turned, calm as breath. "Get me a Sharpie," she said. "Why?" "I want to mark the day cowardice got handwriting." By sunrise, a police cruiser idled by the curb. Officer Delaney, a young man with kind eyes and a nervous jaw, stood in Ruth's kitchen as she filed the report. "We'll log this as criminal mischief with implied threat," he said. "Keep all digital copies. Anything else happens, call immediately." As he left, he paused at the door. "You've got a strong house here." Ruth nodded, "and a stronger spine." Back at the courthouse, Harlan filed a motion for protective custody of the estate. His paperwork was flawless, his tone cold and focused. "We're naming Candace as a possible agent of intimidation," he explained. "It'll rattle her legal team, at the very least." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "And at most, it may grant you court-supervised authority over the property while the suit proceeds." Ruth smiled. "Let's give her something to flip, besides my house." That afternoon, rain dusted the windows like a lullaby. Ruth sat by the kitchen table, wrapped in a knit shawl, writing in her leather-bound journal. Day 143 since the fire. Day 32 since the lawsuit. Day 1 since the threat spelled itself across my gate. Candace thinks silence is surrender, but silence is planning. Silence is strength being rethreaded. I'm done being quiet. She closed the journal and looked up as Chloe set a plate of warm toast in front of her. "Still writing?" the girl asked. "Still fighting." They smiled without words. Just before dusk, the mail arrived. Amid the envelopes, legal notices, another electric bill, a folded-up newspaper, was a thick, cream-colored parcel with no return address. Ruth hesitated. It smelled faintly of pipe smoke and mildew, like something unearthed from a cellar. She slid it open with her thumb. Inside, a brass skeleton key, heavy in the hand, and a folded piece of parchment, scrawled in shaky black ink. "The truth lies beneath." Ruth looked up at Nora and Chloe, her expression unreadable. "Looks like we've got some digging of our own to do." The key was colder than brass had any right to be. Ruth held it between her fingers, the teeth sharp and old-world, like it belonged to a grandfather clock or a forgotten jail cell. Rain tapped the windows above her head, like fingertips eager to get in. She stood in the hallway outside the pantry, staring at the narrow plank wall she'd always assumed led nowhere, just dead space behind the shelves. But the key had matched something, a tiny corroded lock, hidden behind a swinging row of dry goods jars. The moment the key clicked, the air shifted, musty, stale, like opening a time capsule sealed by secrets and grief. The door groaned open to reveal a narrow wooden staircase descending into pitch. Nora held a flashlight over Ruth's shoulder, while Chloe clutched a spare battery pack. "Watch your step," Ruth muttered, hand trailing the wall for balance. This wasn't meant to be found easy. The wood beneath her feet creaked in protest. Dust curled up like breath from forgotten lungs. At the bottom they found it, a dirt floor basement, lined with shelves, tarps, and a single rust-colored file cabinet. Against the far wall stood 4 crates stamped E.E. Everly, 1987. Ruth crouched beside the first and peeled back the lid. Inside ledgers, notebooks, legal folders, letters bound in faded twine. Her husband's handwriting sprawled across every page like he was still alive and talking to her through ink. Chloe blinked at one letter in particular. "To be opened if anything happens to me," she read aloud. Ruth didn't move. She took the envelope with reverence, as though it might burn her hands. She slid her finger under the flap. Inside was a single-page letter, dated 2 months before his sudden aneurysm in 1999. Ruth read in silence. Her hands trembled. Nora steadied her shoulder without a word. "Ruth, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I always feared money would divide this family once I was gone. So I've placed safeguards, offshore accounts, trusts in your name, fail-safes Candace doesn't know about. If she ever tries to move against you, you'll have proof. You always carried this house on your back. Now let it carry you. Love, E." Ruth exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for 20 years. She passed the letter to Harlan that evening. He wore reading glasses now. He hadn't back when Ernest was alive. "This," he said, tapping the bottom line of the page, "could flip everything. If even half of this documentation is accurate, you've got not only a defense, you've got leverage." They spread the contents across Ruth's dining table. Chloe began taking photos, one by one, creating a secure digital archive. "Should we go public?" she asked. "Not yet," Ruth replied. "Let's see what happens when truth corners them in private." The basement gave her more than paper. It gave her purpose. She worked late into the night, sorting, highlighting, filing, rebuilt her life with every page. She no longer saw herself as evicted, erased, pushed to the porch. She was returning to the foundation, one brick of truth at a time. Then, just before midnight, her phone buzzed. It was a fraud alert from her bank. Alert, large incoming deposit, unverified source, flagged as suspicious. Her eyes narrowed. Someone had triggered the trap. The morning air was sharp with the scent of dew and coming war. Ruth sat across from Cynthia Monroe at a sunlit cafe near the courthouse, fingers wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. A manila folder lay between them, battered at the corners, heavy with truth. Cynthia, elegant in her restraint, slid on her glasses and flipped through each document with surgical precision. "This isn't just valid," she said finally. "It's ironclad. Witness signatures, dates, notarization, all untouched. This is the last will and testament of Ernest Everly." Ruth blinked slowly, her jaw set. "He knew this might happen." Cynthia nodded. "And he gave you a sword wrapped in silence." Back at the courthouse that afternoon, Ruth stood in line at the clerk's office, wearing her Sunday best. Her spine was straight, her hair pulled back, and her eyes gleamed with something sharp beneath the calm. When her number was called, she walked to the window and handed over the original will. "I'd like this formally filed as the true and controlling estate document," she said. "Effective immediately." The clerk scanned it. His eyes widened. "Ma'am, this changes everything." Ruth smiled, Just a little. Yes, it does. Within 48 hours, the court placed a temporary freeze on all Everly real estate holdings, including the Ashland Avenue property. Candace had been quietly preparing to flip through her realty contacts. Escrow accounts were suspended. Transaction histories were subpoenaed. A web of sudden silence wrapped itself around Candace and Mitchell's plans. Darren, the aggressive would-be buyer they'd aligned with, threatened legal action. Candace panicked. She fired off a series of frantic voicemails to Ruth. None returned. One ended with, "You'll regret this. You're blowing up our family for what? A plot of land and some petty score settling?" Ruth didn't respond. She was already writing something else. In her porch swing that evening, Ruth drafted her new will by hand before sending it to Cynthia for formalization. Chloe would inherit the property, not just the house, but the land, the name, the dignity wrapped in sawdust and sweat. Nora would receive a modest trust, earmarked for elder advocacy and local housing efforts. The rest, what Ernest had buried for this very betrayal, would go to local initiatives supporting aging artisans and working-class retirees. No Everly by blood, save Chloe, would see a cent. When a family forgets its roots, Ruth muttered to herself, someone's gotta plant again. 2 days later, Nora threw a backyard gathering in Ruth's honor. String lights flickered above folding tables. The scent of apple cobbler and pulled pork filled the air. Old neighbors from Ruth's workshop years came, men with calloused hands and warm hugs. "You were always the tough one," said a grizzled man named Henry. "Looks like that porch swing's got a better fighter than any courtroom." Ruth raised her lemonade. "We're not done yet." Chloe smiled across the table, pride plain in her gaze. For the first time in weeks, Ruth allowed herself a breath without bracing for battle. Just as the night quieted, Ruth's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Unknown caller, no voicemail. Just a name on the screen she hadn't seen in over 30 years. Marjorie L. Whitaker. Her husband's old law partner, buried in memory like a bone in the yard. Ruth's heart skipped. She answered with a quiet, "Hello," a breath on the other end. Then a voice, raspy, familiar, and carrying more weight than time should allow. "Ruth, I have something Ernest wanted you to see, and you need to see it now." Next day, the woman standing on Ruth's porch wore time like armor. Her silver bob was swept back into a tight twist, her trench coat buttoned neatly despite the early southern heat. In her hand, a slim briefcase. Her voice, when she finally spoke, cracked gently under the weight of memory. "I'm Marjorie Whitaker. Ernest and I practiced law together for over 20 years. He left me something for you, just in case." Ruth gripped the screen door, her knees nearly buckling. She hadn't heard that name aloud since Ernest's funeral. Not once in 30 years. "You'd better come in," Ruth said, voice dry as bone. Inside, the kitchen hummed with the low whir of the refrigerator and the clink of 2 cups set down gently on the counter. Marjorie opened her briefcase, pulling out a leather folder tied with a blue ribbon. She slid it across the table, the smell of aged paper wafting up like old cedar. "These are affidavits," Marjorie said, signed by Ernest and notarized under seal. He'd seen signs of Candace's financial manipulation before he passed. He didn't want to believe it, but he prepared anyway. Ruth untied the ribbon slowly, revealing notarized statements dated over a decade ago. One detailed Ernest's intent that Ruth remain sole beneficiary of all property, especially the Asheville house. Another named Candace as a potential risk, citing incidents of unauthorized account access. Ruth blinked hard. "He never told me he was scared." Marjorie gave a sad smile. "He wanted to protect you, not burden you." By afternoon, the kitchen transformed into a war room. Harlan arrived, eyes widening at the new documents. "This is a sledgehammer," he muttered. "It supports every part of our fraud complaint." Marjorie added, "There's more. I brought financial ledgers too." Ernest shifted assets into a trust under Ruth's name, a trust Candace failed to declare in court. "Jesus," Harlan exhaled. "She's going to lose everything." Chloe helped scan the affidavits and ledgers, saving them into the cloud folder marked proof of ownership. She looked over at Ruth and whispered, "Grandpa really did see through her, didn't he?" Ruth nodded. He just waited too long to say it out loud. Meanwhile, Chloe took her courage to Darren. He was outside Candace's office, phone glued to his ear, arguing with someone over liquidation timing. Chloe stepped in front of him like a wall. "You need to leave my grandmother alone," she said calmly. "I know everything." Darren scoffed. "Go play hero somewhere else, Chloe. You're a teenager. Stay out of grown-up matters." She didn't flinch. "You don't want what's coming for you in court," she said. "And if you even think of stepping foot near Ruth's house again, I'll make sure every shady thing you've ever touched gets aired out, starting with that forged inspection letter." Darren's face drained of color. The winds were shifting, and the town could feel it. That week, Ruth received an envelope from her cousin Paula in Tennessee, a woman she hadn't spoken to in 15 years. Inside was a handwritten letter that read, in part, "I always wondered what happened to the strong, funny woman who taught me to use a handsaw. Now I see her again, in every news article, every whisper through the family. You're fighting with grace. I'm proud of you." The local paper published the letter 2 days later. Support surged. Neighbors dropped off casseroles. Old friends called. Even former students sent cards. Ruth read every word in the silence of her porch swing, heart both full and raw. The next morning, her phone rang. It was Cynthia, her attorney, her voice steady, official. "The judge has set the final court date. 1 week from today." Ruth stood by the window, watching the golden wash of late afternoon light stretch across the porch. "Then we fight. One last time." You could feel the courtroom breathing, heavy, deliberate, like a beast watching its prey decide whether to run or rise. Ruth didn't flinch. She stood between Harlan and Chloe, spine straight, cane firm in hand. The judge hadn't even entered yet, but Candace was already shifting in her chair, lips pressed thin, foot tapping in betrayal of her perfectly curated calm. Ruth scanned the rows behind the railing. Nora was there, arms crossed, jaw clenched, next to Paula, who gave Ruth a single proud nod. Even strangers who'd read the newspaper letter were present. A community rising around her, one seat at a time. The bailiff called the room to order. The final hearing had begun. It took all of 8 minutes to dismantle Candace. Cynthia opened with the notarized letter from Ernest, followed by Marjorie's affidavit. Then came the financial records, scanned emails, voice memos, and expert analysis of the forged signature. When Harlan presented the original will, dated, witnessed, sealed, and long buried beneath Ruth's basement, there was an audible gasp in the gallery. Candace's attorney attempted a flurry of objections, but none stuck. When Candace took the stand to claim Ruth had manipulated her way into sympathy, the judge interrupted. "Miss Everly," he said sternly, "the evidence submitted shows a pattern of calculated deceit on your part. This isn't just a civil dispute. You will address the court respectfully, or not at all." Candace sat back down without another word. Darren refused to testify at all. Ruth's turn came last. She stepped up with effort, pausing only once to catch her breath. The courtroom fell completely still. "I didn't come here today to win," she began, voice steady but clear. "I came to be remembered for the truth. Not the daughter who sold my walls for commission, not the silence I was expected to live in. I came as someone who built her home nail by nail, who buried a husband, raised a child, held a grandchild, and got told I was in the way." She let the silence breathe, like her old porch did in the early hours before dawn. "But I wasn't in the way. I was the way. And now I want what was mine, so no one else has to be erased in their own story." The judge didn't even look at his notes. His ruling was swift, his voice final. "All claims against Mrs. Everly are dismissed. The estate, including all contested properties and assets, are to be returned to her immediate ownership. The court acknowledges the authenticity of the original will and supports the elder abuse countersuit moving forward." There was no applause, only the deep, unshakable breath of justice settling into old, scarred lungs. Candace stood like her bones had turned to ash. Darren wouldn't meet Ruth's eyes as they shuffled out, whispers chasing them down the courthouse steps. Later that evening, Ruth sat on her porch in a soft knit sweater, her favorite one with the worn elbows and cedar scent. A pitcher of sweet tea sweated on the table. Nora passed around slices of lemon pound cake while Paula flipped through old photo albums Chloe had brought out from the attic. The sun dipped behind the Carolina hills, casting the porch in a gold so warm it felt like apology. "I'm proud of you," Chloe said, placing a soft hand on Ruth's knee. "You changed things." Ruth smiled faintly. "I just remembered who I was before they told me to forget." Nora raised her glass, to remembering and to raising hell when people forget who raised them. The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was real. It filled the air like music, rolling soft and wide across the porch rails. Hours later, Ruth stepped inside. The house smelled like old books and clean floors. Safe again, hers again. She sat at her writing desk beneath the window, pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer, and started her memoir with a single line. "They said I drool and fall silent, but I spoke and my fortune spoke louder. But I spoke and my fortune spoke louder."